welcome to Cal Chat, a show where we talk about our favorite Al-Anon and Al-Anon literature. With me today is a very special guest, Michael. Thanks for joining the show, Michael.
You're very welcome. Thanks for inviting me.
You had picked out a very important book as your Desert Island piece, the one book that, if, out of all the literature, you could take to a desert island with you. And go ahead and tell me what the name of that book was.
How Al-Anon Works for Families and Friends of Alcoholics.
All right. And why that one out of all the literature?
Well, there's multiple reasons, but the most important one for me personally is the passage at the bottom of page 86 at the end of chapter 11, and it begins with the word forgiveness, and it's a very different way of understanding forgiveness than I had before I came into the program. And that difference in understanding was that when I forgive, I'm really doing it for me. There's the residual benefit of, it being good for the other person or persons. But the reality is that if I do it for me, then what I'm doing is releasing myself from a resentment I've held for a very long time or for a short time. And by releasing that resentment, I don't have to continue to be miserable because I felt like I was wronged or somehow hurt by somebody else.
So you always felt that it was something that you did for somebody else.
I always thought that part of that was my upbringing. It was I was never supposed to think about myself. I was always supposed to think of others. I can say very easily I resented that, and then I got into the habit of thinking, if I forgive somebody, I'm letting them off the hook. That was another part of it, Pat. And I didn't want to let them off the hook. I wanted to keep the guilt card, And this is a totally different way of thinking about forgiveness because it's all about letting go, just as we talk about in the first step.
Now, was there a point in your life where you actually put this into practice and, maybe
yes.
Someone in your life?
It was about 6 months into my recovery, and I was reading the definition of alcoholism in the service manual. I grew up in an alcoholic home. My father was the first alcoholic in my life, and I had developed a very unhealthy hatred for my father as I grew up. By the time I was 18, I didn't even want him to still be on the planet. And when I read that passage, there's only one way to say it. I had a spiritual awakening. It was like the veil between he and I, the wall between he and I dropped. And for the first time, I really accepted that he had an illness. And I wouldn't condemn anybody else for having an illness. Mm-hmm. But I had condemned him because I had always thought of it as an excuse. And so I realized that I had the opportunity to do something for myself as well as for him, but mostly for myself. If I could let go of that resentment and forgive him, then I was free to move on with my life. So I wrote him a letter, and I actually mailed the letter to him, and I got to see him in the 2 consecutive years after I wrote that letter, which was 2012. I saw him in 2014 and 2015, and we had a wonderful visit. He never mentioned the letter, but his demeanor and his behavior told me that he had gotten it. And there was a lot of healing there, Pat.
Makes me think, how your relationship might have continued had you not read this passage in this book.
Not only my relationship, but my personal health, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and the way I related to everybody else. I was full of resentments when I came into the program, and with time, those resentments have just continued to evaporate, and I try to pay close attention to any expectations I might form because, as we also know from our literature, an expectation is a premeditated resentment. And I've also released myself from some of the expectations I've had of me.
Yeah, I think, forgiveness for ourselves is a gift we can give ourselves as well.
Yes.
You mentioned that your health got better, and
yes.
Just all these other things kind of cascaded from doing that. Like you mentioned, a spiritual awakening.
Yes.
You don't want to go back to the way life was before, being spiritually asleep. You want to be spiritually awake, and forgiveness is definitely a powerful tool. I would call it a tool. Well, I'm glad you found that in that book. That changed your life, and definitely for the better.
There's another aspect of the book too that the first part of the book. It's in two parts. The first part is a way for me to become familiar with all the aspects of the program, and then part two is personal sharings. Everything in this book is illustrative of what I need to know to lead a healthier and more spiritual life than I did before I came into the rooms. And having that with me on a desert island would help me stay sane, more sane with the help of my higher power and the book.
Yeah, that it's kind of like a guidebook.
Yes, which is exactly the reason, as I remember it, there was a point at which we were informed that the cost of the paperback edition would be reduced so that we could offer it to newcomers. So it's also an outreach tool.
It is.
And one of the groups I'm in are currently discussing about, because they've been giving so many of the books away, I think they're concerned about can they continue to do that. So I talked with some GRs the other day when I was at the district meeting and asked what their groups did. And they had some wonderful suggestions about maybe handing it to a person after 2 or 3 meetings, that kind of thing.
Yeah, the reduced price for the softcover book, the World Service kind of headquarters started doing it as a trial basis originally, and they've extended the trial, I think now at least maybe twice. And it just came up again at this last conference in, I want to say, March of this year, of 2016, and it got re-extended one more time. So
good.
For another 3 more years, softcover is going to be, well, at least right now it's $6. But for me, I like to hold on to books for a long time, and hardcover is my way to go. I'll just demolish a softcover book so quickly. But the nice thing is there's a couple of differences in the softcover versus a hardcover book. But the printing of the book, the pages aren't that much different. How you mentioned the end of chapter 11. It'll be the same in the softcover book or the hardcover book, because they really made an effort to make sure that the changes they made it only affected, I think, maybe 2 or 3 pages, and that was around, I think, page 15 and 16. But very minor, because I know they've had other books where once second editions and third editions come out, they're off by quite a bit, and that's not the case with this book. One of my favorite sections or chapters is Finding Reasons to Live. And I was shocked when I got to it, because it's a section that talks about suicide, and I don't really see that too much in the kind of grown-up Al-Anon literature. I really didn't start seeing it until I got into the Alateen, the younger literature, where it was definitely more prevalent. So I was really happy to see it in this, book for adults, so to speak. I don't know if it's considered a taboo topic or something, but that chapter deals with it in a very touching way. I was crying my eyes out, at the end of the chapter.
Yeah.
That really affected me more than anything in the book. And there's so many different stories, though, in this book, especially the second half of the book. It's just all personal stories and something in there for everyone.
Right. And I haven't read all of them, so thank you for telling me about that. I just turned to it, and I'm going to put a little tab in there and read it later.
The very first sentence of that personal story, Finding Reasons to Live, to me that first sentence just grabs you right away, and I dare you to read that and not read further, And
that was that first sentence describes most of my life beyond my teen years. It was a sequence of moments when I didn't think I deserved to be here. And I'm lucky I'm still here, and I have Al-Anon to thank for that.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I was trying to find more reasons to escape. That's another reason why I like this title, Finding Reasons to Live.
Yeah.
It's a different way of looking at life and, wanting to be in this life. Because you only get one. This is
yes.
The other way I read this book, there's some books that you just read over and over and you kind of get blind to them after a while. But I read this one by the index, using the keywords in the back. And what I do is I sort them by page number, so I type them out in a document. So when I'm going through a certain page, I'll be looking for these keywords.
Oh.
Yeah, and sometimes there's, keywords in the index. I'm like, I don't see this on the page at all. How can they say that this page is about, abuse or whatever? And then I really, really, reread this page, a couple more times, and then I'll find the word. I'm like, I don't know how I missed it in the first place, but, now I see this page in a different way, and it's just, for me, it's a great way to experience this book a different way. And what I'll do is I'll post this document of my kind of index keywords on the show's webpage, calchat.libsyn.com, so that others can do the same if they want. But it's just a really interesting way to kind of see the book in a different light. I even saw things about the, our opening welcome that's read at every meeting. I saw that in a different way. I saw the closing that's read at the end of the meeting. I saw that in a different way. So I wouldn't have done that if I had not read this book by the index.
Right.
So at this point, we'll just take a break, and we'll have a few words from one of our sponsors.
Michael, this is your sponsor, Bob. When you are experiencing stressful situations, I offer you this quick suggestion. Take a moment to breathe and know you have choices. Life is about your perception. If you change the way you look at your problems will change. This has been a message from your sponsor.
All right. Thanks, Bob, for those wise words.
Well, this concludes part 1 of 2 for episode 1. Hope you enjoyed it. And if you'd like to listen to part 2 of 2, that is a separate show that is also uploaded that you can download. So thanks for listening and happy reading.